We want to acknowledge the peoples of the three fires, the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples on whose land we live and work. The three fires people are indigenous to this land. We acknowledge our physical location is built on stolen native land. We are therefore guests on this land. We acknowledge the histories and traditions of the people who originate here first and who are still here. We make this land acknowledgement as an important first step. The Grand Rapids, Grand Haven, Lakeshore area Citizens Climate Lobby knows that we need to always engage in the important work of social justice by taking continual steps to learn, honor Indigenous individuals and groups, and honor the land where we do our work.
Thank you very much, Kelly. We appreciate that. And as I mentioned before, that this past week, if you didn't have a chance, if you live in Grand Rapids or if you received the link from what I sent out or others, that Robin Wall Kimler, the author of Rating Sweetgrass, spoke to hundreds of people, both at Frederick Marriott Garden and GVSU. And I'm saying this only because she is Potawatomi, and she basically says that gratefulness and reciprocity is what is going to save us. And I start on this note of being very grateful for all of those who lead and serve in this chapter and in other chapters. And this is our intro time to just introduce ourselves. And so I would like to introduce, so you know who the leads are of Grand Rapids, Grand Haven chapters. I'm going to start to my right, Chris, if you just raise your hand. There's Chris. She does all the IT, and she's now sharing with several other people the newsletter, and she does basic communications to members. And so when you get emails saying, tonight's our meeting, this is who sends it. It is Chris. She's responsible for that. Yes. So next to her is Deanne. And Deanne is from our Grand Haven chapters. And she also is working on newsletter and other things with Chris. And so she's responsible for also in communication and just being on our team of leads. Dolly? Dolly does the EJ committee and is responsible for that. And she also does a lot of help with me on onboarding. Kelly, who read the land acknowledgement, she is one of our liaisons. We have two co-leads on liaisons. Kathy is the other one. She is with her husband, Dennis, in Cuba right now. So, yeah. Patty is another of the lead from Grand Haven, part of our steering committee lead group. David Crandall. There's David. And David helps with onboarding and activation and lots of other projects. He was on the lobby before Kelly and Kathy volunteered to take it. John Constantine. John does a number of things, was also on lobby, but he's now doing more local state kind of lobby work and helps on program committee and a number of other things. John and I sort of started with the chapter, and that's how many years ago, John? I don't know. I lose track. So those, did I miss anybody? Oh, 7 years. Oh, right. Thank you. So those are our leads from this chapter, but we have some visiting leads, which is really cool too. So Dwight, would you want to raise your hand? Say hi. Dwight is from the Midland chapter. So we're honored to have you here, Dwight. Nancy Berg. Yeah, she is from the Holland chapter. So a part of their leadership team. So thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate it. Now we have several new people on, which this is their first meeting. So Amy. Amy, you want to say anything, or you just want to say hello?
Let me unmute. I just want to say hi. I appreciate being here and getting more involved.
Oh, good. Thanks.
I'm excited.
Oh, good. Roger.
Yeah, still feeling fairly new because I've been gone a lot this fall since trying to my first orientation meeting. So mostly I've been limited to emailing, and I just made my first phone calls to Congress this afternoon.
Oh,
So
good, good.
starting to do more things.
Yeah, that's great. Julia has her screen off. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I've recently joined and looking to get involved somehow. I am going to have to leave because we're about to sit down for dinner, but hopefully I'll catch up with you all
Okay,
later in
all right.
the
Or
meeting.
you can take it. Okay, if you just want to keep your screen off, that's perfectly fine. It's no problem. If you're eating dinner, we get it. It's fine. Thank you. Thank you for introducing yourself. So
Thanks.
I am so grateful. I just wanted to, if there's anybody else I missed, I know Bruce has been on board for a while, Bruce Odom, and I'm trying to see if there's anybody else new that I missed. Nancy O'Neill is from Grand Haven. Zoe's been with us for quite a while. And John Job, thank you very much for joining us. He goes way back years and years of original with his wife, Mary Ellen Micah, as the founders of our chapter. So that is really an honor. So thanks for joining us, John. So we're going to move now to our announcement screens, and so we'll move right into that as finding out what's going on. So this is the organization of MICA, which you can see in the parentheses is Michigan Conditions for Climate Action Climate Action. And Lisa Del Bono, who's from our Traverse City chapter, she is responsible for setting up this piece in Michigan. There are other groups of conditions for climate action in the region, but Lisa put this together. This is tomorrow. My screen is down a little bit. I don't know, Chris, if you can move that up just a little bit. I don't know. You can see that it says November 17th at noon. I'm just reminding you that the link will be in the chat if you're interested in this and what the speaker is talking about. You can see this. It's on the screen. Amanda Brezel. And working on getting food resources to people at the community level. So like many other organizations and like us, MICA brings in various speakers. One of our members who couldn't be with us tonight, he sent me an email, Steve Ashmead, who's a retired physician. He has become active in MICA too. This is open to all health professionals, this organization, and they're doing some really good work in working with doctors and hospitals and spreading the word about and working with them on sustainability issues and climate action. So it's a great organization that Lisa has put together. Next time. This is our big social event for December. We don't have a meeting in December. We party. So it is Monday, December 4th, holiday, and we are so fortunate to have members who live at this co-op housing, Newberry Place, and the address is there. It will also be, of course, in the newsletter on December 1st, 800 Livingston Northeast. It is street parking, probably that's the only disadvantage, but it's a beautiful community rooms and kitchen area that we've used for several years now with no cost because we have members there that live at Newberry Place. And so it's a wonderful time to get together and socialize. And as you can see, we are doing appetizer potluck and BYO drinks. And it's from 5:30 to 7:30 and open to everybody. You can bring friends or significant others or whoever. It's fine. And you can see the picture of David. That's David Crandall. He's our music, and his music partner, that is Nick, and Crows, and they do a wonderful in a separate little room of music. And it's just great to have the music and social and just get to know people better, and especially for all of you who are newer. So, okay. Coming up in January, doesn't seem like it. It's less than 2 months. That's unbelievable, isn't it? So our topic in January, a little bit different. It's being resilient with advocacy. And I'm hoping to bring in our national person who's the head of the Resilience Committee. She does special training and workshops, and I've been in contact with her. I'm hoping that this date will be open for her, for her to speak with us in regards to resilience, something that I feel, and maybe many of you do, that we're going to need in 2024. In looking at all of the information that's really going to be flying at us, and being resilient and grateful and upbeat about what we can do in our advocacy work. The second one is a documentary that we are actually sponsoring through several other organizations. Documentary is Too Hot to Work. This is a face-to-face event on January 24th. We were so fortunate. Chris is responsible for putting this together. She really has done an incredible job in working with Kaufman Interfaith Institute and several other faith groups, now also GVSU Sustainability, and we're bringing in a number of groups to helpfully co-sponsor and get the word out on this. There's a little explanation below the photo there, who the organization is, but it really talking about the conditions of what's being created through climate change and farm workers and what they have to put up with, and some serious health issues that have developed from that. So please put this on your calendar, save the date, that this will be an important one to get together. We will have tabling and opportunity to have other organizations involved in this collaborative event that Chris has put together. So, okay, this looks really busy, I know. We're going to speed through this, but this is our chapter structure, and this is how we operate with our committees and our teams, and we support the national focus of electrification, clean energy permitting, forestry, carbon fee, and dividend through the work we do in our teams and our committees. The lobby team consists of both the national focus with the legislative person, Representative Hillary Scoten, and the District 3 that most of us are in. And this is what I was briefly said. Kelly is here tonight, as Kathy is in Cuba. Kelly's going to do a very short little report on their recent meeting with Scoten's staff.
Sure. So 6 of us met with a member of Representative Scoten's staff, Esther Bunden. She is the environmental legislative aide. This was on November 7th, and we had about half an hour with her. So it was pretty brief, but it was a good conversation. She was very receptive and just friendly and engaged and interested in the conversation. Our primary ask was around the big wires, and then we did talk about secondary asks of the RISE Act and the increased TSP Access Act. And I would just say generally that, you know, while we didn't have any like hard and fast response on Rep. Scoten's stance on these, Esther definitely expressed that she, I would say generally agrees and aligns with some of the concepts within them. But also emphasized that they just need to do more, you know, more research and more work into them, because Rep. Scoten really aims to kind of view things from all different angles and focuses on bipartisanship. So successful meeting. I think it's a good start of a good relationship that will continue to build.
Thank you very much, Kelly. State legislation actions, we're going to get into a little bit of that in another screen on announcements. So I'm going to hold on that. I just wanted to point out that John Constantine has been active with another organization called GRAT, that he wears multiple hats, and been doing some work in regards to the state legislation. And David has been active with as John has too, but with GRCC for local actions too. So I just wanted to say that, and that there are things happening. The state information I'll point out in the screen that we have announcements on. So Grassroots tabling committee, it's kind of like, yes, we've got this going on. We have certain things, but Nancy Berg, who's on from Holland, she helps us out in numerous ways because she is very active from the Holland standpoint in doing tabling. We just did one at GVSU on Energizing Weekend. There'll be some other opportunities coming up. What we're looking for is a co-lead on our tabling committee. Right now, Shirley, for the Grand Rapids Grand Haven part of it, has been the organizer, and she wants to continue to do that, but she would like a co-lead with her in helping on that part of it, particularly in the summer months, because we're very busy on tabling in the summer months. EJ committee, Dolly, do you want to say anything about last night or anything?
Well, last night we had the Robin Wall Kimmerer book discussion, presentation discussion, and it was really wonderful. I love getting other people's perceptions and what they're taking away from her presentations. We will be doing a book discussion group in the winter, probably January, February. And we are still in process of looking for books for that. So if any of you have read books that seem to be especially good when it comes to environmental justice, I'd love to have you put it in the chat or somehow get a hold of me and let me know the name of the book.
Okay, good. I don't see Peg on. Is Peg on at all? I don't see her on. I'm going to kind of table the part on the climate action program. Peg does the email notices and kind of coordinates through the Brett Cease. What you got today, you all got received an email notice from Brett Cease of CCL. At least if you are a member of CCL, you would have gotten this. I will talk a little bit more about that email in another notice, an announcement. So activation, social event. David, do you want to say anything about that, David Crandall? Yeah, okay.
You're on mute, David.
I'll just make a comment. We've been having social events for new members. If you are a new member and wasn't able to make the last one and would like to attend, the next one is going to be November 19th. That's a Sunday at 2 p.m. David Crandall is hosting these, and they're really just a nice time to talk about and get to know the other people who are attending. And the last one went very well, and I think it's helpful to really get to know who's in it, and talk about where you're at and what's possible to do. So that's really what that is all about. Okay.
I sent out invitations only to the newest members, but anybody that's on this call that would like to come, you're welcome to come Sunday at 2 o'clock.
Okay. Please put in the chat if you would like to come, and either an email or a phone number so David could have that. That would be helpful. Okay. Grass Tops, we are meeting, the next meeting, we meet only on a quarterly basis, January 29th at 11 a.m. Any new members who would like to learn more about Grass Tops and attend this meeting, please put in the chat. And I right now am the lead. I'm working on getting a co-lead on that. So I appreciate that. To know that if you're interested in it. Media, mostly social media at this point. You can see what we're on. There are several people who are responsible for posting on the various aspects of social media formats, and they're working on that. We can always use another person who is anyone out there that's really into Facebook and would like to be posting on Facebook. Please also put that in the chat if you have any interest whatsoever. We're down on that one. We have been good about it in the past, but right now we don't have individuals who really are that interested and have been following that. Chapter development is consisted of, now each of these teams that it's hard to tell, but lobby, grassroots, grass tops, media, and chapter development are the 5 teams. And then we have committees under each of them. Chapter development, we have a steering committee that really consists of all of us co-leads and any co-liaisons like with Kelly and Kathy. We meet once a month just to look at what the organizational pieces that we're doing and what we're working on. There's a program committee. Under that, we have set plans all the way through for programs through 2024. It's not necessarily that we've confirmed every single one of them, but we are at least have the topics and the focuses are out there. We have yet to complete the September through November. And then the ones that I've already announced, we have some collaborative actions that are happening, like the January one that I announced, but it's too hot to work. Meet and greet for new members. I've been doing that with help from Dolly and from David. We are still to be determined in December. I know December is a very busy month for people. And so I'm not sure that we will have one, but if that's another thing, if you're new and you haven't been to a meet and greet, and you're interested and you think, well, December might not be too bad. These are usually only 2, 3, maybe 4 at the most people that attend. So it's a pretty small group and an easy way to also to talk about CCL. And the last one is the communications committee, which I've already sort of announced with Chris's involvement, but we now have Chris, Dennis, and Deanne, and Julia. I didn't put your name down there. So Julia's going to be also helping with that committee with the newsletter and just keeping track of the member notices and all of the emails that we send out. So, okay. So that's chapter update. That was quick, but then you can sort of see the structure that we work from as a chapter. Next screen. All right, this is all happened in the last 2 weeks. Honestly, 2 weeks ago, we didn't think we had any announcements at all. So this is the good news, state legislative update. So the clean energy package, the Senate bills of 271, 273, 502 all passed. This is significant, guys, really significant. We are moving right up in the ranks from a national standpoint and having good, clean energy policy out there for Michigan. So just the bullet points you can see there: clean energy standards passed, strengthen waste reduction targets, changes in guidelines for the Michigan MPSC, and expanded that in the sense of guidelines, the creation of a community and worker transition office, which is important, changes in how large-scale solar and wind projects are sited. This will probably be very controversial because now the state will be responsible for the siting, which taking away the power from the local areas. Some people will definitely have problems with this, but we would like you to be able, when you have opportunity, to thank the Dems for passing this strong climate legislation and respectful to the Republicans, whether they supported it or not. But we, Chorus and CCL, maintain nonpartisan. But the Dems did some good work on this, and we needed this in Michigan. So community solar wasn't something that was passed. It was House Bills 4464 and 4465, but it is making progress. And John Constantine is going to make just a couple of comments about this because he's been in touch with.
I'll go on for just 1 minute. The solar cap on solar panels has been lifted from 1 to 10% in a different legislation, and that's a good thing. But the solar bills currently haven't gone anywhere. The key issue is that Consumers Energy would say, we do community solar. We would be glad to put solar panels on place in Grand Rapids and sell you electricity. But the intent of the bills is they are community-owned solar. And that means that you can buy a few shares in the project on your top of your local schoolhouse and get energy to your house, which happens in other states. It can be done. Key there is that it's local participation based. Environmental justice groups see this as a real sticking point that they want to fight as death ground. It's very important that this happens to lots of people in hard frontline communities, low-income communities. Rachel Hood, our local representative, is the leader of this bill and also leader of many other things in the environmental sector. speaking with her a couple of days ago, she's very clear this will be reintroduced. She is convinced that this will pass. Ironically, of this list, this is the only list which is the bipartisan bill. It's got multiple representatives from both sides of the House. But it's also got some content which some vested parties are very keen on delaying. So this is a really significant thing, and she needs support.
Okay, thanks, John. So the little comments that I have underneath there, he's really sort of said that, but what we mean by support, there are lots of coffee hours that happen, right? I mean, you probably get emails that, Winnie Brinks is having a coffee hour, Rachel Hood or whoever. Show up to those coffee hours if you can. I mean, some of you may have working schedules that are not possible, but try to show up for them and support this community solar House bills and put out an opinion out there that is bipartisan and that we need to get this passed. And you can always write letters and of course go on their sites, that kind of thing. That's another way to do it, but face-to-face is always effective. Also, I wanted to point out that our CCL state leads sent a support letter to the Energy Committee of the state level in support of this community solar house bills, and saying that CCL is all behind this. This is a biggie, and because it's bipartisan, we can really stand out there and say and be supportive in that way. We have a little bit more difficult in walking the line when it's purely a partisan bill, but this community solar, as John said, it's got a lot of good things in it, and we want it to get passed. So, okay. Okay, now this CCL update, it may be a little confusing, and we only have a couple of minutes left, but I'm going to speed through it. This is national update, so you understand the difference in the sense of what we just talked about was state. What's important about it, and you probably just got an email about this, and I know emails are overwhelming at times, but the Climate Solution Caucus, which is something that just was started up recently and was in existence a few years ago, and it consists of equal number of Republicans and Democrats in the House. So right now there are 13 Republicans, 13 Democrats, and they sent a letter to the House leadership. Now we're talking about the new Speaker Johnson and Jeffries of the minority leader for cooperation on pushing through legislation on permitting. And I just took a little piece out of the quote, this was advanced bipartisan climate policies. And CCL leadership at the top level with the people that are close to the lobby part and to the legislative people are saying this is very important message that they just sent. It has a lot of credibility to it. And so we hopefully will see some action in regards to the permitting, which is very, very important in being able to get some of these clean energy projects through. Okay, so that's that piece. The next one is what your call is all about, and which you got an email from Brett Cease today about, and it's called Big Wire Call to Action. And you can see the script there. It's been introduced in the House and the Senate. And it will be to streamline the country's patchwork energy transmission system. And I saw that Alan was on. I don't know if hopefully he's still on. Alan talked to us several years ago about how important the transmission system is and how scattered it is in our US. And so this is really, really important. And I just made my call on the link that Brett sent out through the email, and it is super easy. They do it all for you, and so you click on it and just follow the instructions. So it's really easy. I encourage you to do this. This is a way we can really take action with thinking that, well, this isn't that important, but it is very important. And this is what we hang our hats on in CCL, in being able to really support these bills that are out there. And then the last one is the November virtual conference. Videos are available. You can find those on the main homepage of Citizens Climate Lobby and also in community. If you missed the conference or if there's anything else that you want to go back and look at, it's a great way to connect up. There were some very good keynote speakers. one of our top, I guess he's vice president of something in, I'm sorry, I don't have his title exactly, within CCL, was fantastic. Dana Nutricelli, I think he says his name. Please take time to listen to that, because he's the guy that we call the nerd. He really does. He calls himself that. Gets into the details, but he's very straightforward and easy to understand. So I encourage you to watch that one too. So all under the conference part. All right. So David Fraker, I know I saw him there. And that there you are, David. Good. I am just going to say that I am pleased that he agreed to do this talk about his work and as an arborist. And we had the great time of going to a conference together to Washington, D.C., and also the regional conference. But when you drive an EV to Washington, D.C. and back, you're in a car for a long time. So we were 12 hours over and I think 12 hours back. Is that about right, David?
Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, so we had lots to talk about, as was with Aaron was with us too. Aaron was having a hard time being able to make it tonight. But we certainly got into all of the problems of the world and possible some solutions. And one of it was talking about forestry, which is a passion of David's. So I am going to turn it over to David and thank you. I am grateful for you, David, in doing this work and being willing to speak for us.
Well, thank you, Jen. I appreciate the introduction, and it was an honor and a pleasure, as always, sharing that trip with you. We did get to talk a lot about trees, probably more than we'll be able to even go over tonight. There's so much that can be said. I don't know that we can solve all the world's problems, and I wouldn't proclaim to have all the answers, but I would like to think that we figured out a bit as an industry, and those of us who know quite a bit about trees, and they're often discussed sometimes without too much basis of knowledge as far as what their capacities can and can't be. So hopefully after discussing that some with you all tonight, you'll have a little bit better of understanding of what role trees can play, not only within the fight to keep a stable climate, but also within just the general ecology and biology of our planet, and how crucial of a role they fulfill. I'm going to share my screen here. Is everybody seeing that okay?
Looks good, David.
Perfect. And okay. First off, I did also want to say it was a pleasure hearing Dale's talk last week. Wow, what a wealth of knowledge we have within this group. And I was thinking before this talk, it's almost a little bit of a balance of what he and I do. He works on making houses sustainable, and I kind of work on the properties outside and around them, in maintaining trees and ecosystems. And for any of us who live somewhere, you know, is pretty much everybody, whether you own a house or not. But often the home can be considered to a greater or lesser extent, not as well as I wish people did. And the work that Dale's doing is awesome on that. And we kind of do the same thing for trees. So I'm an arborist professionally. I work with trees on an individual basis, and that kind of is what distinguishes us from foresters who work with entire forests. The joke is that we can't really see the forest for the trees. We just work with individual patients. But in my talk tonight, I'd like to talk with you all about trees on the large as well as the small scale and everything in between. So I did want to just start off by saying we'll talk a bit about the values that trees provide tonight in qualitative and quantitative ways. And there's just so many ways that trees improve our lives, and they really can't be counted in some ways, and in some ways we have to actually count and account for them in order to help to understand and maintain these values. So that can be a tricky balance. But there is just an unstated beauty that is contributed to our world by the fact that we have forests, where anyone who's been in a healthy forest, or who's even experienced an individual remarkable tree, understands that feeling that those can provide. This is a forest in China, a flooded forest of, I believe, dawn redwoods. And there's just so many sites like this around our planet that we would really greatly be impoverished by if we didn't have them. Some of those myriad values, while we can't, state them entirely accurately, we do try to state them outright. So carbon sequestration is a topic of great interest to this group, of course, both the sequestration, which is pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, which trees do very well by photosynthesizing, and then also storing that carbon afterwards in their biomass, in their trunks and leaves and roots, and also in portions of the organism that have been sloughed off and lost to the ecosystem, things like root fragments that are stored in soil, carbon. That's an entire area of expertise that we won't even really get into tonight. Trees, and I think this is really very relevant to the kind of people side of the equation versus just ecosystem effects. Most of us aren't existing, at least most of the time, out there in forests. We're residing in urban ecosystems, in cities, and that small portion of the planet relatively that's occupied by cities is much, much warmer than the overall planet, and our cities are warming a lot faster. That effect actually is quite a bit bigger than just the overall warming of the planet, and so trees can play a massive role in countering that. It's that cause itself is effectively the result of trees being removed and concrete being erected, and the difference in the physical properties of those surfaces. To go back to the more ecosystem level effects, trees provide natural habitat both in rural settings, but also in urban settings. Urban forests are tremendously important habitat for thousands and thousands of species. And then human health effects of trees. There's been quite a bit of research on this, and a tremendous amount of well-demonstrated literature over the last few years, especially on the human health impacts that trees have. Living by trees reduces your risk for cardiovascular disease, for mental health issues, for I could rattle off a huge number of things, but it seems to be the case. You can almost state the opposite, that trees are an essential component of human health, and that lacking them actually is a cause of human disease in a number of ways. And then the structural basis of forests kind of goes without saying, but forests wouldn't exist without trees, and they're one of our most crucial biomes on the entire planet. So here's some info from some of the way that the US EPA states it. You don't have to read everything through, but some of the benefits that they elucidate or enumerate are reduced energy use in buildings. Some of the things that Dale was talking about, we often, and it can sometimes be at cross purposes with solar generation, but trees can do a lot to reduce the energy needs, heating and cooling costs of a building, and work with those building envelope considerations. So there's some complex pluses and minuses there, but they can generally be a great value if they're sited properly. The improved air quality in cities, especially. Trees intercept pollutants, not just CO2, but particulate matter. A lot of toxic compounds are absorbed and intercepted by the large surface area of trees' leaves. Trees absorb through their root systems and release in a more stable and sustainable way to the atmosphere large volumes of rainfall. And as that increases, that function of trees is even more important. And they can reduce pavement maintenance even, and just provide a general improved quality of life within cities. So the carbon sequestration picture, I did want to spend a little time on that, because I think it's just so central to what this group does and what trees can do. Trees absorb a heck of a lot of carbon from the atmosphere. While our world's forests are both a sink and a source of carbon, on the net, it's a pretty good picture right now. So you can see that on the map on the right. Forests that are emitting carbon are in the purple or redder shaded colors, and the greener forests are net carbon sinks. So while forests are releasing about 8 billion metric tons of carbon to the atmosphere each year, they're absorbing about double that, about 16 billion metric tons. And so that's the good news. There's about a net absorption of about 8 billion tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere by our global forests. That is all carbon that not all that humans have released, but if you think about since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the amount of carbon that humans have released to the atmosphere every year, 8 billion tons of that net amount. If that trend extends back, this is a 2021 or 2022 figure, I believe, has effectively been buffered or countered against. And so the effects of climate change that we've seen so far would already be that much worse. We'd already have CO2 levels that much higher if it weren't for the effects that trees have already been helping us with. It is really a tremendous amount of carbon. So that's the good news. The bad news is not to, rehash figures that we've all seen before, but the graph on the right shows the just exponential growth in global carbon dioxide emissions of humanity that we've seen in really a blink of an eye in terms of geologic time. And this is overwhelming the capacity of global ecosystems to absorb that carbon in the way that those normal biogeochemical cycling processes would have everything balanced. And so we can't keep doing what we've been doing on the right and just have trees compensate for it. There's some, I think, less educated discussion of trees that way. Trees are super awesome. I love them. And we would be really up a creek without them. But they can't do it all. They can't do everything. As we all know in this group, there's not a single climate solution. Trees are a crucial and important one, but the 8 billion tons of carbon that our forests are absorbing in net is compared to the 37 plus billion tons that are being emitted by humanity. What trees are doing is now getting dwarfed just by the sheer massive quantity that we're emitting to the atmosphere. And so that's one bad part of the equation. I guess the good flip side of that is if we're able to reduce emissions below that 8 billion, forests will once again actually be reducing more carbon from the atmosphere than we're putting in, and we could actually see things move in a more positive direction. But the bad news is that forests are actually heading in the opposite direction as well. And there's a number of reasons that we'll talk about for that. But forests by the end of the century are predicted to become net emitters of carbon instead of a net carbon sink. And so that's the really bad news. We're really simultaneously emitting a lot of carbon into the atmosphere, and we're also damaging and really destroying a lot of the capacity of our forests to absorb that same carbon. So beyond the carbon picture, there's just the straight up thermal, how hot is it picture. This is really more relevant in urban environments, the urban heat island effect, which has been much discussed. I think the image on the right is really the picture's worth 1,000 words type thing here. You can see just how much hotter the pavement and the built environment hardscaping surfaces are relative to the few trees that you see in this environment are substantially cooler. So the tree surfaces are cooler because they're intercepting that sun and evapotranspiring water, and you get that evaporative cooling effect. So it's cooling the tree, but it's also cooling the local environment. And the more trees that you have around, the greater this effect. So how much is this effect? Urban forests, on average, a US EPA study found that just short of 3 degrees Fahrenheit lowering in areas of urban forest compared to unforested urban areas. So that's a pretty substantial decrease that's caused within the areas where people actually live. We're talking about twice. 3 degrees Fahrenheit is about or over twice as much as the amount of total global heating that we've actually seen so far. So this is actually at present quite a bit larger of an effect than the net global increase in temperatures due to human greenhouse gas emissions. That's on a much larger scale, but if you're a human existing in a certain environment, this is going to have a bigger impact on where you live. So this can really have it's going to be a powerful tool to help mitigate the effects of overall increased global heating. And it doesn't stop there. That's an average within this study, but figures upwards of 10 degrees Fahrenheit can be found in urban environments. And the counter is true. Without trees, you're seeing that much increase in above normal heat values in an urban environment compared to what it should be if it had more normal background vegetation, which was the base condition of the planet prior. And then shaded surfaces can be 20 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. So depending on what you're talking about, the difference can be really tremendous. This is from the American Society of Landscape Architects. They found that urban trees could reduce the summer heat deaths by 40%. So it's really a tremendous effect on human health. And this is a big environmental justice issue as well. Urban heat islands are in the densest urban cores, and we know that those associate with the highest density of people, and often with impoverished people as well, who are unable to mitigate against those higher heat effects. There's a lot to go over tonight, so I'll be breezing through a lot of these slides. I wanted to concentrate on a lot of the benefits of trees because I think people have this vague idea that trees are good, but they really are powerful tools that we need to keep active. So if you're convinced that trees are good, you want to take action and have trees doing these, actualizing these benefits for you. There's a lot to consider. And this is kind of the section that I'll breeze through more, but you can see on the right just how many factors need to be considered for trees to actually perform. I always tell people the benefits that we get from trees aren't just for the trees being there, but they really come from the tree actually performing. And a tree that's unhealthy and stressed is not going to provide those values. So it's very important that the right tree is chosen, that it's properly maintained, and there's a whole bunch else that goes into it. You should work with a professional to make sure that that happens. The microclimate around a building is important both for making sure that your trees perform, and it also influences that microclimate. And with using intentional design decisions, you can really influence the way that the building works alongside architectural decisions and other design elements to really improve the space. This is the USDA plant hardiness zone map. I just wanted to show this. This actually just got updated. The USDA updates this every decade or so. They just came out with a new one. I just saw that came out this morning. So we are thoroughly, this is the older one. They've shifted about a half a degree north. For those who don't know, a hardiness zone map is how cold of a zone you can grow a certain plant in. So it's basically the coldest nights of the winter will freeze off plants that aren't hardy enough, and that's what determines that. So this is a boon for gardeners. We're able to grow things further north than we used to be able to. The flip side of that is that there's more energy in the atmosphere. So I wanted to run through a few kind of local examples. These are just screenshots that I've taken over the last year of, I'm sure everybody's noticed how much tree damage, maybe it feels like more than the background normal amount of tree damage. And this is something that I've been concerned about for years and warning people about for years, that as the atmosphere heats, we have more heat energy and more humidity as well. And those are the two main fuel ingredients that allow summer thunderstorms and other extreme weather events to manifest in more powerful ways. And so we are seeing more tree damage. The image of this tree, that tree was not only defective to begin with, but it was a species, it's a soft maple. It's something that was likely to fail before the storm, and then the storm caused it. So it's really two elements working together. We need our trees to be quality, especially in proximity to buildings and other areas that have high human occupancy or that could cause large problems. But also we're seeing greater stress on these trees mechanically at the same time. And so that's really a 1-2 punch that makes this very challenging. And it's more important than ever to maintain your trees and to make sure that your trees are less risky before the storm. We all also took note, I think, of the large plumes of smoke coming from the Canadian wildfires. And I took these screenshots. I wanted to show just how large those plumes in some cases were, and not only a national level impact or in a continental level impact, but some of those plumes extended over to Europe. So these are really becoming large and damaging events, and not there was variability. These events existed before, but it's generally agreed upon by climate scientists that these are becoming more frequent and more intense, and they're predicted to increase more. So here's another tree that was wind thrown at a cemetery just over the last year, and it was right after all of this heavy rainfall occurred. And we see root plate failures like this when the soil's saturated. So we're seeing heavier rainfall events, larger amounts of accumulated precipitation, and that can cause failures on trees too. And here's the good old consumer's energy outage map. Tends to light up like a Christmas tree. We're seeing that much more often than we used to, or we would like to. I'm going to breeze through this a bit, but work with an arborist. The tree on the left has good structure. It's going to be much less likely to fail than the one on the right. And this is also an example of a structural defect that exists in a young tree. So planting trees is good, but planting the right trees and doing it right is very important. So I want to move on to what I think is, that's kind of what I do during my day job. I work a lot with maintaining individual trees. But sometimes I feel a little bit like I'm rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, not to seem too downer about it, I guess, but it can be very frustrating to spend a lot of work, have employees maintain trees, and then really a much larger scale, we see invasive pests and diseases come in and destroy all the work by killing an entire species. It just feels very larger level than the individual tree maintenance. So while both are important, and I think we need to walk and chew gum at the same time, this is really an area of passion of mine, and I want to spend the rest of my time tonight talking with you about it. Invasive species globally are the second largest cause of species loss. And for trees, that comes in the form usually of pests like fungal diseases. The left photo is Dutch elm disease or pests. And diseases like Dutch elm disease, and then insects or other arthropods are pests like emerald ash borer that you have in the middle. And then spotted lanternfly is an up and coming pest. It hasn't made it to Michigan yet, but it was introduced on the East Coast in 2014 from Southeast Asia. And it's dutifully marching its way this way. So be on the watch out for that. So this is kind of from left to right in order of Dutch elm disease came in the 1950s was really devastating our urban forests. Those were some of our most crucial trees. We replanted with ash, and then the emerald ash borer came in and has recently, since 2000, taken out most of our ash trees. Spotted lanternfly likes a different set of trees. So for every group of trees, there's quite a few pests and diseases that have been introduced that are really catastrophic. One of those that I want to talk about, I think I chose to focus on this because it's a little bit less, I guess, lost cause. As far as emerald ash borer, we're really not going to quarantine that at this point. There's some interest in trying to maintain it with biocontrols. But a lot of these, once the horse is out of the barn doors, it's really too late to close it. And oaks are one of our best genera, a genus or a group of multiple species of a tree that are all related. One of our best tree genera that are still doing well, that are still, broadly speaking, healthy. They're also some of our strongest wooded trees, some of the least likely to fail in storms, like what the images that we looked over before. And so it's really disconcerting to know that there's a disease of oaks called oak wilt that is in Michigan. It has been around for quite some time. It has not taken out our forests, but it has the potential to do so. And so it's an organism that I think is really worth battling against, because it's still, for biological reasons, it's something that we can get ahead of, and we have an opportunity to isolate and remove it from the environment and prevent it from spreading to other trees. It would take more concerted effort than is occurring in a lot of places right now, but it is possible. So within Michigan, we have almost 150 million red oak trees that are at risk. These are probably our most crucial forest tree in a lot of ways. And they represent over 10% of our total forest land volume. You can imagine the amount of carbon that's stored in these trees. There's 68 million red oak trees that are larger than 11 inches in diameter within the state. That doesn't even include our urban oak trees. So The state has recognized this as an important issue. It was recognized last year and then again this year by the governor's office. Chose to designate May as Oak Wilt Awareness Month to help raise awareness about this disease. Oaks reduce soil erosion. They do all of these beneficial things that trees do generally, but they kind of do it better than a lot of other trees do. And they tend to embody a lot of carbon, and they keep it isolated from the atmosphere for a long time because they're very long-lived and strong wooded trees. They're also one of the best habitat contributors. So that element that we talked about for trees generally, there are more species of Lepidopteran larvae, so butterflies and moths, are really, really crucial food items for birds. So anybody who's a birder, if you know anything about bird biology and their life cycle, even though a lot of adult birds will eat seeds or other foods, almost all young birds require basically caterpillars to be raised. That high protein food is what their parents are bringing them. And if you watch a bird nest in the spring with the parents zooming back and forth, they're bringing those in from multiple species of trees. But there's over 550 species of Lepidopteran larvae that grow just on oak. That's way more than any other genus. So we really can't afford to lose oaks from an ecological perspective. They're just, there's not a substitute for how good oaks are at what they do. That's a chickadee, and it's literally thousands of caterpillars that a pair of chickadee parents has to bring in order to fledge their fledglings over the course of just a couple of weeks. It's a tremendous amount of biomass that needs to be produced by these trees in order to make that functional. Oaks are also very important to our economy, for the timber stand value, for recreation and tourism. $3 billion estimated to our economy and 50,000 jobs. And if we do allow trees of a given species to kind of go the way of the dodo, for lack of a better term, not that trees don't fail or need to be maintained or removed near structures to some degree as a baseline, but it's tremendously more. I have personally seen a huge number of ash and elm trees that need to be removed way above your background level because they're dying from these invasive pests and diseases. And if oak wilt gets out of hand, we're going to be seeing the same thing. Some property owners already have, but the amount of investment that's going to be needed to be made to just make these trees safe is going to cost a tremendous amount of money, regardless. So I would make the argument that it's worthwhile to invest in getting ahead of the situation now instead of losing them and having to pay anyway. So it's really an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure type situation. And if you want to know if oak wilt is by you, I wish there were a better way to tell you. Take this with a grain of salt. There is a public interactive map that's operated by the Michigan DNR, and it is useful. So if you go, there's also a webpage that I wanted to point everyone to, michiganoakwilt.org. And we won't have time tonight to go over all the biology of the disease and how oaks work and interact with it, but I would encourage you to go to michiganoakwilt.org and learn more. You can also find the link on that website for the DNR's Oak Wilt Viewer. So every point on this map is a reported oak wilt site. So oak wilt is in every location that's been marked on this map, but this is not everywhere that oak wilt is. We know that there are large gaps in unreported areas. And in some cases, there have been, I have a friend who's a consultant who had a client in a county that was not on this map, and she diagnosed an oak wilt infection. And the customer had been told for years, oh, it can't be oak wilt, it's not in your county because it's not on the map. And it was in the adjacent county, and it just hadn't been recorded on the map yet. So don't take this as the gospel truth, but it is useful. So what is oak wilt? It's a specific fungal pathogen, scientific name Barsy-Eckman fagacerium. Again, we won't get totally into the nitty gritty because there's just not time, but I think it's important to understand that this is a relatively novel pathogen on our landscape. It really didn't exist here throughout the history of the development of our forests over the last several thousand years or hundreds of years. And it's a disease that's specific to oaks, both to red oaks and to white oaks, although it impacts red oaks to a greater degree, and it's more disastrous for them. we'll go over some more of those details. So a red oak is a group of oaks that are closely related and are more susceptible. Their leaves have pointed tips. You can see that on the left of the screen. And on the right is an image of a white oak leaf. White oaks can get this, but you're almost always going to see it in red oaks. And red oaks are any of those species that you see in the bullets on the left. Whereas the white oak family, which is susceptible technically, but it's very rare to see it in a white oak, at least at this point. So there's some examples of the bark differences. And again, consult with a professional if you have doubts on any of this, but it is relevant to know the differences between the two groups if you're trying to diagnose the biology. So after it infects a tree, you get this kind of zombie tree, which will then make this structure called a mycelial mat or a pressure pad. And that has the spores on it. And the reason that that's important to know is that these little beetles called picnic beetles will come in, and if they've fed on, they're attracted to these spore pads because they kind of smell cidery. Some people say sort of like juicy fruit gum, or I think it smells like kind of like an apple orchard in the winter or in the late fall after a lot of apples have fallen and are fermenting. And so it attracts these beetles, and if they land on a spore mat and pick up spores, and then you go and prune your oak tree during the growing season, it's really incredible. All it takes is a single infected beetle to land on that open wound within a few days. After several days, the wound will seal up. It won't be an open access point into the tree. But it's really a case of getting into the tree's internal system. It's almost a human equivalent would be getting stuck with a needle from somebody with HIV or something like that. So the bark is a really good protective covering, and the tree is not susceptible without an infected beetle landing on an open wound. So this is called the disease triangle. You need a susceptible host, an environmental condition that is amenable to the transmission, and also the presence of the pathogen. And in that case, that's not enough. You also need a vector and a fresh wound here. So really everything has to align right. And I know this is a little bit technical, but this is actually kind of the good news, as weird as that might sound about oak wilt. It's kind of hard for this transmission to occur. Everything needs to happen just so. And so if we can avoid that threat, we can't do much about the vector. Those beetles are gonna, quite a few of those are actually native. They're gonna be flying around regardless. We can't do anything about the susceptible host. Red oaks are susceptible. But what we can do is to prevent wounding red oak trees. And that's really the biggest piece of information that I would want you to take home tonight and consider as not just the best practice, but really crucial. If you own oak trees or if you maintain them, it's very important to not prune oak trees during the growing season. So we work on oaks from November through March. During the winter, the beetles aren't active and the trees are also not susceptible. And so oak wilt just can't be transmitted then. The highest risk period is in the spring. May and June are really the highest risk. And then it goes down some from there, but trees still can be infected during the summer and into the autumn. So winter pruning is really the way to go with oaks in order to prevent this disease. Once oak wilt is suspected, it can only be diagnosed by finding one of those pressure pads, which is really the job of an expert, or from a positive lab sample that was sent for analysis through usually it's a PCR reaction these days that gets diagnosed with. It's a lot like human medicine. And these are some of the symptoms that you'll see on an early infected oak. The leaves start to, and this is why it's called oak wilt, the leaves just start to brown out. They'll often turn kind of like an army green. It's not so much, it doesn't really look like regular leaf fall, if you know the way that leaves turn brown and abscise in the fall. They look almost like somebody lit a fire under the tree and scorched it. So that's how they wilt out. And it'll often be on a single side of the tree. We're going to breeze through a lot of this because I know I'm running short on time and I want to leave you all for questions. But I want to go through some of these slides and I want to say thank you to Julie Stahesky, who helps co-teach the state oak wilt certification course with me and a couple other people. We help qualify arborists in identifying and managing oak wilt, arborists around the state. So that's a really important program. And she put together a lot of these slides, and we won't go through all these details, but I just wanted to give you guys an idea of how complex this process is. Once you have oak wilts on your property, it's really a nightmare. And so you really want to prevent it if at all possible. So these are the steps that need to be taken. The trees will die within the course of a year. Usually it's just within a couple of months of the infection of the initial tree. That tree is ultimately probably going to need to be taken down. Ideally, it gets taken down and the material disposed of properly so that the spores can't continue to infect other trees. So that material needs to be either buried, burned. Once it's chipped, it's actually not able to produce spores, so that's okay. Or fully debarked, or stacked and covered with a plastic tarp for a year. Herbicides can be used to try to help spread the slow or prevent the spread of this disease within a group of forest trees. That's beyond the scope of this course. Just to say that Michigan DNR and Wisconsin and Minnesota DNR have researched this, and there's some possibility of use there. We do use it as a tool, but none of these are going to fix the problem. If it's a first-year infection to a tree, the entire root plate can be extracted by heavy machinery. Again, it gives you an idea of really how challenging this disease can be to address once it gets into a site. The other probably most important tool that we have is to trench. So we'll cut a 5-foot minimum deep trench around the group of infected trees to prevent that pathogen from spreading out into the surrounding trees over the next several years. And that can be done with several pieces of equipment. The best is a vibratory plow. This is a Ditch Witch RT 125, which really causes minimal surface disturbance. And we'll usually do this in the fall. The Michigan DNR does this and operates this on state properties this way as well to try to contain oak wilt infection centers. A mini excavator is another option, although that's more disruptive. And why are we doing this? So the way that it transmits from tree to tree is through an underground root network. Many of you might know from, if you've read any of Suzanne Simard's work or other of the kind of popular literature on trees these days, there's the much discussed wood wide web of trees grafting their roots together and sending signaling compounds, possibly even nutrients from tree to tree. And the system is unfortunately a double-edged sword. It probably provides trees with benefits. It's still uncertain exactly what all of those benefits are, but within the context of this novel pathogen entering the environment, it's also a highway for this pathogen, which again only exists inside of the tree. So it really needs to be directly transferred somehow. It provides a network where it can slowly over the course of several years start to jump and infect other trees nearby. So this is what an oak wilt infection center looks like several years on. Through the root grafts, maybe the infection started here and then it moved through this root. This is just a kind of a hypothetical model, you know. It'll jump in weird ways, and one year you'll have one patch die, and then you'll see it move another direction one year. Sometimes it'll skip a tree and wait and come back after several years. But it's because of this underground network. And so we have to cut around those roots and try and isolate the infected trees from others. And we do that using a mathematical model developed by a scientist named Brune. So this Brune chart is really important when we go ahead and do that. So I did want to end by just saying there's a lot of stressors on oak trees these days. And if you have an oak that's in decline or not doing well, don't jump to the conclusion that it's oak wilt. Again, it has to be diagnosed by a competent arborist. You want to look for an OWQ, an oak wilt qualified individual. That's somebody who's taken and passed an examination, the one that I mentioned earlier for our course. So here's some other issues that can manifest similarly, just to put them out there. Oak decline is kind of a general physiological decline of oaks that's becoming more common as well. And that's from multiple different stressors on the tree. It's not single invasive disease or something like oak wilt. It's more of an individual tree issue. When trees are in decline, you can get two-line chestnut borer, which looks a lot like emerald ash borer, but this is actually native. It'll only attack stressed trees. It's sort of like cheetah on the Serengeti going out and taking down the weak. But it's not a problem for trees as a species, just for individual stressed trees. And so that can cause canopy dieback. On the upper right, you can see, wow, somebody might say, wow, that looks like oak wilt, but it's not. It looks a bit different to an expert. This is another leaf disease, Cynipid gall wasp. Anthracnose is a native fungal disease. This especially occurs on white oaks. Tubacia leaf spot is another leaf disease, and bacterial leaf scorch we see more in the south, not so much here. But you can see there are things that look a lot like oak wilt. So again, don't jump to any conclusions. Bur oak blight is really bad in the Chicagoland area on bur oaks, but not aware of any reported cases in Michigan of that disease yet. And then herbicide injury, which is not a disease, but there are some herbicides that can get in systemically and kill trees. And there's a lot of stuff being sold to consumers right now that really shouldn't be. So don't misapply herbicides, but read labels. And there are things like Roundup 365, ground clear, that will get in and kill trees and deform foliage. So really the red flag is this rapid leaf drop midsummer. And if you see that kind of a pattern, consult an oak wilt qualified arborist to have them help you diagnose that. So here's some pictures of some early oak wilt symptoms early on in a tree's infection. You might see a crown peeking out at you like that, where all the surrounding red oak trees are in good health. And I did want to say, oaks as a group very rarely go down, as they're very, very hardy trees. And so if they don't have issues to begin with, for a tree to just up and die like this, that's when I start usually suspecting oak wilt, especially when it was healthy. And then within a few months, all of a sudden it just goes down. That's when you want to reach out. So here's an example of a new infection overland transmission site. So where one of those beetles brought the spore into a tree. The tree on the left had been pruned during the growing season, and the homeowner contacted a colleague of mine because they noticed, hey, we're raking a bunch of leaves and it's July. So on the left, you can see that crown thinning. A lot of average people might not even notice it at that point. 6 weeks later on the right, the tree's about as close to stone cold dead as can be. So this disease moves very, very quickly. Here's some more examples. So later in the year infection, the tree on the left had a single section, one side of the tree, what we call flag, where it wilts out like that, but the rest of the tree was still alive. And then in the following spring, it just fails to leaf out. Very common on red oaks after infection later in the year. So thank you so much. Here's my contact information. I know it was a lot, and I think I went over a bit, Jan, but hopefully that's enough time for questions in the audience. There's just so much to talk about within trees. Just this oak wilt aspect, we literally teach a 2-day course to ISA certified arborists just on the biology of oak wilt, and even that's not enough time. So trees are really massive, complex, interesting organisms in their own right, and they're also absolutely crucial for not only our battle against climate change, but also just maintaining healthy ecosystems, living on a planet that, you know, I guess I often feel like you hear a lot of talk of saving the climate, and we do need to save that, but like, what are we saving it for? The biodiversity crisis is really a big issue too, that if you don't know much about, I would encourage you to look more into. And, you know, we need a climate that can sustain life, and we also need life to still actually be there to exist in that climate. And if we don't get ahead of some of these issues too, I really fear that we're going to lose that. So that's why I'm passionate about this, and thank you so much.
Well, David, thank you. I mean, that was comprehensive and your timing was fine. We've got about 15 minutes left for questions. And I think if you would take down your screens and we'll just move to the gallery, that would be great. I didn't see where we had any specific questions in chat. I think that you were so comprehensive in what you were saying. We were trying to follow everything that you were saying, which was, but I'm gonna, if you take it down and stop sharing, then we can go to gallery. And why don't we just go and I'll we can open it up to specific questions within the gallery. Anyone that might have a question, just raise your hand, unmute yourself, and then David will just let you respond in that way instead of going to chat and doing that direction. So anyone who would like to start after that great presentation and all the information he gave us?
Jan, they are putting questions in the
Oh,
chat.
are they?
There are
Okay.
2 already.
Okay.
First,
Go ahead.
the
Yep.
first one is how to deal with accidental non-human oak wounds is the first question. And I'll let you go with that one, David, and then I'll give you the second.
Yeah, it's a great question. So one thing I always tell my clients is, and this goes with that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure mentality. It's worth working with a reputable and knowledgeable plant healthcare company, an arborist who has that capacity under their belt to implement what we call an IPM program, integrated pest management. So that perspective is that you want to monitor and get ahead of health conditions instead of trying to play catch up afterwards. And that works. That's true for so many issues across the board with trees and other landscape plants. One aspect of an IPM program, if you have oaks on your property, I always tell my clients to reach out to us if they see damage during the growing season. Sometimes a summer storm comes through, and it's most crucial if you take damage in May or June. Again, those are the periods where, just due to the way that the biology of this disease works, the highest risk is really present during those times. And so it does take time for from when a beetle gets to that open wound that's been opened up and it smells the sap, it's going to come in. If a spore lands on that, it takes, we don't know the exact timing. The research hasn't, unfortunately, there's a lot of aspects of the biology of this disease that have not been thoroughly researched enough yet. There's a program at MSU undertaking some, but research funding is really, really limited on this. And that's one thing that I wish we did better as a society, was invest in these things preemptively. So we don't know for sure, but it does take probably a few days at least for the spore, the fungal spore of the pathogen to germinate, and then, you know, move in from that if you've got the snapped off branch, to move in to the main trunk and the rest of the tree. And so what we can do if it's reachable from ground level, it's simpler, or more often it's higher in the canopy of tree. We can get a climber up there to wherever that snapped off. We can come back and make a clean cut, which is advisable anyways to prevent just general decay from getting into the trunk of the tree. So we can make a clean cut, and then immediately we paint that surface so that beetle isn't able to come in and deposit a spore. So that's best practice. Great question.
Thanks, David. The next question is from Dale. Any advice on invasive Siberian elm, white mulberry, black locust, etc.?
Yeah, so I focused tonight on invasive pests and diseases of trees. But I did mention on that slide just the general concept that invasives writ large around the planet are very problematic. And trees themselves can be invasive species, the ones that you mentioned. A great subset to start that list with. There's quite a few invasive trees in Michigan. And so managing those trees out within native habitats and maintaining the quality of native habitats to allow quality tree species to grow and not be displaced by those, that is important. We do quite a bit of that too. It's kind of a whole other area of consideration, but yeah, if you're a property owner or you have property that you maintain, investing resources in getting ahead of those issues is very worthwhile. It can be challenging. It's not, there's not a one size fits all approach that always works. It really depends on the exact situation, how large it is, what the invading species is, what the pre-existing habitat matrix is that species is invading. There's a whole bunch of things to put together. So again, work with a competent professional, or if you are able to identify those species yourself and it's within your own capacity, then you're doing yeoman's work by going and taking out those invasives and maintaining that habitat. Ideally, you're also making sure that something quality comes in and replaces it, because if you just remove the invasives, nature abhors a vacuum, and you'll just get more invasives. So something has to kind of hold the territory after they're removed, but it's a good way to go. So that's something I've done since I was a kid, and there's not enough people doing it out there.
Okay, there were two comments from Dawn. First of all, she thanked you for speaking for the trees. And then she had a question. Is there any hope for the eastern hemlock, woolly aglet? I don't know how to say it. I think it's pretty bad at Hoffmaster.
Yeah, so hemlock is a native conifer species. It's a genus in the same family as pine trees. It's not a pine. It's a beautiful, beautiful tree. They're slow growing, understory conifer. They have existed. They don't really make it out to Grand Rapids way too much, but all along the Lake Michigan Lakeshore, where the microclimate is more appropriate to them, especially in the backside of dunes. And then if you go up to like Porcupine Mountains has some just massive hemlocks up there. Some really good examples. Long story short, it's an awesome tree. It's another one of the trees that we are in the process of losing because we allowed a disastrous invasive insect to come in called the hemlock woolly adelgid. That was only discovered in Michigan. It's been on the East Coast for many, many, many decades, but our population is isolated from those. And so it would have been good to keep it from getting here. We implemented a state level quarantine to keep new hemlocks from coming in that could have been host material for that, but we did it too late. And so it looks like it came in on hemlocks that were grown out of state, that were infected. They were brought in the landscape trade. I didn't talk much about this, the actual modalities and ways that invasives come in, but it's mostly due to various forms of so-called human industry. And I'm not opposed to industry. I mean, I'm a small business owner myself, but it's so important that these things are done right and the proper preventative measures are taken. And there's really very little regulation, and we usually get at it too late. So that's what happened with this. Once something is here, it's much more challenging to remove. If more investment had been made early on after this discovery in inventory and monitoring, which is another thing that I would generally promote as far as like, how do we keep this from happening? We could have gotten ahead of it as well at that juncture potentially, but we didn't. So at this point, it's moving up and down the Lake Michigan coast. There's a number of counties that are thoroughly infested. And so you can treat individual trees. It requires a neonicotinoid insecticide, which are not too bad for people, but are kind of environmentally not the best if you're familiar with pollinator biology. The good news is it can be injected into the tree. It's systemic. So there are more environmentally friendly ways to address it if you have a high value hemlock tree, but it's not cheap. You've got to re-inject that on a certain interval continuously for perpetuity. And it's really about saving individual high value trees to people. It's not really practical to go out and just save all the forest trees. Like if we had the resources to do that, would be much better off putting it into preventing these pests and diseases rather than going and trying to address them afterwards. But,
okay, David, you have 4 more questions in the chat right now, so I'm going to throw them to you pretty fast.
Shotgun round. I'll go quick.
Okay, what if the neighbor has a big Siberian elm seeding all of our fence lines? Any advice?
Yeah, if you don't really like the tree, pay someone to take it down. If sometimes, even though a tree is not native, it can serve values and functions within a human context. So it depends on if the benefits outweigh the harms or vice versa.
Okay, it's the neighbor's tree. Did you get that part?
Yeah, those can be really tricky situations. Essentially, there's nothing that you can do legally. The neighbor has the rights and responsibilities of their tree, and at least heretofore, although it'd be interesting to see if jurisprudence changes on this. Seedlings coming over from an invasive species has not been viewed as a harm, but maybe that'll change going forward. It would require new case law.
Okay. Another question. If a person notices oak wilt, notify the authorities. Does the landowner need to pay the cost of removal?
Yeah, so this is something, it's a great question. I'm glad that you mentioned it. What I would really like to see, a way that I think we could move forward with a lot better management system for this is to see some public investment. Essentially what happens at present is if an infection center is found, that individual, all of the responsibility just falls on them. You know, suddenly they find out about this huge problem that they probably didn't even know existed. And now there's all these costs associated with managing it properly. And if it's a person who really loves their trees, they might make that investment. But so often they go, wow, that's really expensive. I can't afford to do that. Or they start kind of managing it and eventually throw up their hands. And then it doesn't get managed. And that's a problem for the entire society, because now that's a source population of the pathogen that can go out and does go out and harm other people and cause the same thing to happen all over again. So this is really a collective commons type situation where I think what we need is a model where maybe not complete funding, but I think that probably at the state level, it would be great if we saw a grant program where public resources went into helping property owners get ahead of these situations and manage them out. And if we did that, it would require more upfront investment, but the long-term cost would actually be lower to society at large, and we would keep our oak forests. But at present, it's very challenging. There's not a good model for it. So work with an OWQ, but you're kind of on your own as far as the payment.
Oak wilt is approaching our property up north in Benzie County. Can red oaks eventually be replanted in the same area? And interested in your opinion on the ATREAP tree program.
So I'm not actually that familiar with that program, so I won't speak to that, but I think the really interesting thing to consider is effectively, no, you can't replant, at least within that area. If you're able to contain it and isolate that patch, all the surrounding oak forests is still good. Like we can actually, I think the best analogy for the way that oak wilt works is to consider it like a cancer of the forest. So if you find a malignant infection, you know, melanoma spot or something early on, and you're able to excise that and remove it, you can save the organism. But after it gets too advanced and it's really moved out and colonized a lot of territory, and you get satellite infections and metastasis, beyond a certain point, it's just not possible to, the entire area is contaminated. And so what the DNR is doing on a lot of their in sections of property that are like this is replanting with other species. You know, if you literally didn't have the host there for many decades or something, eventually, hypothetically, you could replant oak, but de facto, oak can't be grown there again. It's a real shame. And so that's what we're up against with this, is if we don't get ahead of it, that's the future we're facing. Were there any other questions? Or is that time?
One quick question, maybe. Any opinions on black walnut as a city tree?
I love black walnut. It's a great species. People often complain to me about the nuts falling on cars and things. That can be a headache. It's a legitimate concern. So this is true with all trees. Placement is everything. If it's in a bad location, it can be very problematic. And again, you've got to weigh the benefits and the costs of the tree and decide if it's a net value. But those can be challenged. I still love the species, but you know, we've got to take it out sometimes when it's just too much.
Okay, and Nancy also wanted to thank you for speaking about this important topic. So
absolutely, thank you all. Wonderful speaking with you again. Very privileged to discuss trees and their habitats and the, you know, we're the top level species on this planet now, and we are changing the planet in irretrievable ways, and we might as well get good at it. So take up the cause and do that in whatever way you do, and thank you for doing so.
Well, David, thank you very much. We really appreciate all of the information and certainly an insight into, you know, the work that you do and knowledge that you have about it. And I appreciate all of what you sharing it with us, because for those who have asked, we are, of course, recording this. And our recordings are always in our newsletter the next month, the following month. So it will be in December. And it also goes on our Grand Rapids community page on the National CCL site. So Chris puts it on there, and you can see all the recordings. You can see Dale's recording from last month and the previous ones. So they're maintained there. Chris, you correct me if I'm wrong, for a year, correct? I think so. So if you're really interested,
They're in the files there.
yeah,
They're in
the
under files, and I
Okay.
don't know how long they last. A long time.
Okay, so there's a couple of ways you can have it, especially for those who like Dwight, who is from Midland, and of course Nancy was on from Holland, and I think John Jones is gone. Well, he's Grand Haven, but anyone else that was from other areas certainly understand. I think that David would give rights and be okay with it being shared too. So. You okay with
Happily,
that?
yeah. This is all information that needs to get out, not enough discussed. So please do. If
Okay.
anybody, I know it was kind of drinking from a fire hose. There's so much to go over in this short time span talk. So maybe somebody will go back and check a section they missed, or please spread it to your friends. That'd be great.
Okay. Thank you, David, very much. And we really do appreciate, the work you're doing. And, it really is, it's immense if we think about in the sense of, so if we're talking about talking to state legislators, this would be something, I mean, I know the DNR is working on it, but more in the sense of what you've been talking about on policy and everything else. So it's a topic to put out there and to be knowledgeable of. So we appreciate you all for attending and coming and being a part of this. And remember, you go out there and call your congressman. It's easy, especially easy off hours, because you don't have to talk to anybody if you're like talking to people. And so it's a simple way, and CCL's got it set up. It's pretty swift. If you make a mistake, they just tell you, okay, do such and such. And so I made a mistake, so I just had to go back. So it's easy. So our numbers count. And so, yeah. All right. Anybody else comment?
Just to piggyback on that briefly, Jan, I didn't mention it because I don't have any asks or anything at present. But we are working on building a cohort of like-minded people who are interested in taking this in a better direction. And maybe at some point there would be some state level legislation or something else to support, or to put some grassroots effort and interest behind. So I'd be happy to, as those developments occur in the future, put that forward, and maybe you could share that with people.
Oh, certainly. And this, of course, as just to be reminded, this is one of the top areas that CCL is supporting from a national standpoint of forestry, as David pointed out on some of your, your photographs and that kind of thing, and what was happening on a worldwide basis. So it is really, really important. And I think we all understand that. That's why we're here. So we appreciate it. So have a good night, and thank you. And for those, remember, party next month. That's what we're doing. We're partying next month. So we hope to see you on December 4th. Okay. All righty. See you. Night.